Hello everyone! Welcome back to this game! When we last left off, we beat this game! And despite some criticisms I had toward the end, I do actually enjoy this game. I wanted to make that clear. Like I said, this is an actual decent Porky Pig game, and I like exploring around the levels. Anyway, I have switched over to the final release of the game. This way we'll be able to hear some of the final soundtrack. And on this screen, I'm going to press down, up, left, left, A, right, down. And if I do that correctly, we come to this screen. This is the alternative options screen. The code that I just put in has to be put in the last few seconds before the license screen fades out. The code also works in the beta version. And this screen appears right before the title screen in both versions. Now, there's not really much to say about this screen. It just lets you view the little cutscenes in the game. We got the opening scene with Porky going to sleep. We got the ending with the eyes. We got the credits. And we got that's all, folks. As an aside, just because I'm a pig does not mean that I can do that outro justice. Anyway, let's exit this. Unlocking that screen will also unlock the debug menu that I've been talking about throughout this playthrough. All we have to do is, once we get to gameplay, I just have to press the select button. Welcome to Joe Booth's handy CMS editor, the all-new fish version. Have fun! I have no idea why this is called the fish version, nor do I have any idea when the fish version was made, because this exact menu is also in the beta version. The only real difference is the beta date is different in the beta version, in the preceding January, which implies that the game was already almost finished 7 months before the final version. In those 7 months, all that happened is the game's soundtrack was redone, and Acclaim became one of the game's publishers. Anyway, CMS stands for Content Management System. Its main purpose is to run the game's random number generator, which generates the game's scenery. And in fact, that is what CMS Active Mode is for. If you turn that off, it turns off the randomizer. The randomizer would otherwise shuffle whenever you start up the game, and when you're on the world map. Now down below it says, why not turn active mode off and try the CMS yourself? Yes indeed, you can actually modify the random numbers within the generator. And I will be explaining that in a bit. First, I want to go over the secondary purpose of this menu, the room select. Basically, it's like a level select. It says right down there, use room number 1 through 6 to select levels 1 through 6. And indeed, I could do that. But not only can you skip to different levels, you can also skip directly to the boss fights if I wanted to. Here's the boss of level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, and level 6. I could skip straight to the final boss if I wanted. How's that for a speed run? But not only that, I could pretty much skip to any room in the game that I want. For example, if I were to go to room number 11, this would be the spiral tree going down before the boss fight. I could totally take an opportunity to try to get the 1-ups at the bottom of this. And in fact, let me go ahead and try that right now. So far, so good. Just scroll to the left, and did I miss my opportunity? Nope, I got him! Huzzah! That was totally the first try, and I did not load state. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that if I did fail and tried reloading the map again, it does not respawn the collectibles. And in fact, collectibles do not respawn until you get a game over and start the game again. Meanwhile, if I were to go to the very last room, which would be room 51, we will wind up in the last secret room of the game. This is how I found out that there is a secret room behind these stairs. And from here, we'll go ahead and go to room 16, because as I mentioned before, only level 1 and level 2 have throwable food that you can find, weapon ammo that you can throw. And unfortunately, as soon as you enter a boss room, your fruit is taken away. However, thanks to the CMS menu, we could warp to any future level and be able to carry the fruit through those. I'm gonna go to room 26 here. This will take us into the ruins of Atlantis. And I wanted to come here because there were a particular few enemies that were kind of a pain to try to get around without fruit. It's also worth mentioning that not every enemy can be hit by fruit. And after all, you're not supposed to actually carry the fruit this far into the game. But there are some enemies that can be affected by fruit. For example, fish. But not that fish. It's kind of high up in the air. Though while we're on the subject of throwing things, I'm just gonna pause the throwing animation. And, that is an interesting frame of animation. I feel like part of the sprite was merged together, like part of it is missing, for lack of a better word, because there is a clear seam there between Porky's head. But it's kind of neat enjoying these frames of animations, though. Like I said, Porky is, for the most part, well animated. I really had to wonder if he was hand-drawn. Well, that fish we're not hitting with fruit, but we can at least go down here. That fish, we can. That fish, not so much. This fish we can, but we'll jump over it. Oops. Watch out for, spikes. Now, this fish, definitely hard to get by without fruit. I managed it, but you know what? Fruit. Fruit, I said. And then further along, there's a jellyfish down here that is hard to get around. But if we trigger it, we can just barely slap it with our fruit. And then coming along here, you have to get past these two jellyfish in order to go down there, which is where the exit to this maze is located. And trying to jump on these in this tiny space is difficult. Doable, but difficult. So, you know what? I'm gonna try hitting you with fruit. It's gonna be a little tricky, because they don't trigger until you're even closer. So, what I'm gonna try to do is... There we go. And then this one should be easier to hit. That is so much easier. And by the way, it's worth mentioning that bosses aren't the only things that take away your fruit. You also lose your fruit if you die. But on the subject of dying, let's go ahead and actually do that, because since we've unlocked that CMS menu, there's an interesting trick where if we die but press select before our death animation runs out, we can respawn with 0 health. This allows us to continue playing until we get hit again. But even then, if we get hit again, we can just reload the screen again. Worth pointing out, by the way, that doing this, you cannot reload the map at a checkpoint. You always load a map at the start of the map. Anyway, I've had my fun jumping between rooms. Let's go ahead and start looking into the randomizer. First up, there is the Sunsoft intro. Sunsoft is one of the game's publishers. They have a little animation that plays when you boot up the game, featuring a little bat. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, there's 8 different animations that can play. In the beta version, you can influence which animation you get by mashing the face buttons on the licensing screen, much like when you put in the debug code. But in the final release, the licensing screen comes after the Sunsoft logo, so the only way to see the other animations is to get a game over. And on that note, you do not have to input the debug code again after a game over, so there's some good news. Anyway, in addition to the button mashing, you can also specifically choose which animations you get with the CMS editor. So I'm actually going to go ahead and warp to a map that I can frequently die at, get a game over, and show off all 8 intros. And I've got a bit of trivia while we are watching these. This intro features a bat named Arrow, who starred in his own games, Arrow the Acrobat 1 and 2, which originally released for both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. Sunsoft must have been pretty proud of those games, as they adopted Arrow as their mascot. And in fact, the games have had enough of a cult following that the Super Nintendo versions have recently been re-released for modern consoles for $6 each. Now, I have not actually played either of these games, so I cannot say personally how good they are, but they look interesting. As for these intros, my favorite is definitely the cloudy one, as it is the most unique of the bunch. Anyway, that is all of the Sunsoft intros. Now it is time to go into the meat and potatoes of the randomizer. There are 8 CMS global flags. CMS Global 1 typically affects the environment, such as whether it is day or night in Level 2. CMS Global 2 through 6 typically alter the scenery. CMS Global 7 will typically either make it rain or fog if the level allows it. And CMS Global 8 will typically trigger snow. Again, only if it is allowed. I mean, after all, it is not going to snow in the desert. Each of these flags have a value that range between 0 and FF. In coding, that means anywhere from 0 to 255. That said, there are not actually 255 settings, rather they are in cycles. For example, let's go back to Porky's house for a moment here. And we'll take a look at CMS Global 1. If it is set to 0, it is going to change the Haunted Woods to summer. If CMS Global 1 is set to 1, it is fall. If CMS Global 1 is set to 2, it is winter. And then if it is set to 3, it is Christmas time. And then going from there, if it is 4, it cycles back into summer. As a reminder, by the way, Porky's house does not have any special music in the final version, not even in Christmas. Now, interestingly, Porky's house does have random scenery that spawns if CMS Global 2 is either 1, or 5, or 9, or 0D, etc. What's going to happen here, I'm going to let you know so you can look for it. Next to the little pond on the left side of the screen, CMS Global 2 is going to spawn a little frog that will immediately hop into the water. And there it goes right there. I will reload the screen so you can look at it again. Because it doesn't hop back out. Meanwhile, CMS Global 2 will also cause something to spawn whenever it is fall. Up at the top of the screen, a cuckoo will spawn out of Porky's house. And as far as I can tell, there is no special scenery that appears in winter or in Christmas. Now, as we head into the second screen, let's talk about CMS Global 7. As I said, this one affects the weather. For example, by default, the weather can be clear, or it could be rainy, or it could be more rainy, or it could be dark and rainy, or it could be foggy. But it can't be foggy or rain everywhere. Again, Dry Gulch Town is quite dry. There's also no rain or fog at Porky's house. It also cannot rain during winter or Christmas, though it can be foggy. And, as I mentioned before, CMS Global 8 can trigger snow. This can be throughout the forest, including Porky's house, although strangely, it only snows at Porky's house if the snow is turned off everywhere else. On the subject of snow, though, while writing the script for this episode, I encountered an interesting glitch. Let me load state, and it is snowing bubbles at Porky's house. This is not normal. I'm not entirely sure how I triggered this. This is definitely a glitch. I assume caused because I was bouncing around between levels and somehow the bubbles from Atlantis were still loaded in and replaced the snow? Unfortunately, I was not able to actually recreate this glitch. The only reason I'm able to show it off is because I save stated it. And interestingly, going into the next screen and swapping the snow trigger, let me do that real quick. Turn on the snow here, and now you cannot tell me that that is not a glitch. What we got here is basically these logs right over here. It is raining miscolored logs. I really wish I knew how I triggered this glitch, but at least I got it on camera. Now let's get back to the working save state real quick and move on, because there's a matter of the remaining CMS global flags, those being numbers 3 through 6. I would like to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen, because those flags will affect the scenery. For example, looking at the Scarecrow, CMS Global 4 will change the hat worn by the Scarecrow. CMS Global 3 changes what the sign says. And CMS Global 6 changes the tombstone. That leaves CMS Global 5, which, if that changes anything, I was not able to spot the difference. It's entirely possible that it goes unused in this level. Now, in winter, the sign always says no screaming, and the Scarecrow is replaced by a snowman wearing a top hat. During Christmas, the sign always says ho ho ho, and the snowman is wearing a Santa hat. Meanwhile, outside of having snow on it, the tombstone only changes in summer and fall. But that is all the scenery changes that I'm aware of in level 1. From here, let us go ahead and warp to level 2. Now, thanks to CMS Global 1, we already got to see Dry Gulch Town at night. There's only a 1 in 4 chance of that actually happening. Otherwise, it is much more likely that it's going to wind up being daytime here in Dry Gulch. Say hello to the birdies. And speaking of birdies, CMS Global 2, it has a super rare effect on this town's opening screen during the day. It's like a 1 in 256 chance. So let's go ahead and trigger that real quick and watch what happens. That happened. Let's watch it again. I did not add that sound effect. Well, that bird is dead. Good thing this is only a dream. Now, within the level itself, CMS Global 3 through 6 can do things like changing the cactus into weeds, and also post some signs on the doors. It can also replace all the bones in the level with flowers, which definitely improves the look of this rundown town. And within the infamous Dry Gulch Hotel, CMS Global 1 can change the floor coloring. And CMS Global 3 breaks the clocks. And that is everything in Dry Gulch Town that I'm aware of. Onward to level 3. Now, we've already been here during Halloween. This is thanks to the 1 in 4 chance with CMS Global 1. And the other time, the opening screen here will be a summer evening. And if we turn on CMS Global 2, change that to 1, that will spawn a TNT stick at the top of the screen. Once again, there is only a 1 in 256 chance that this will spawn. How unfortunate for it. Not only has a rare chance of spawning, but it has such a short life too. Meanwhile, when it's not Halloween, the raft ride is appropriately tropical. And speaking of rain, I think it's a nice touch that the rain splashes in the water at the entrance. Now, there's no randomization at the sunken ship, so let's go ahead and warp to the ruins. Now, you've already seen the Daffy and Porky statues here, but CMS Global 3 and 4 can also change the statues to Sylvester and Tweety. And the statues can be changed independently of each other. So we could totally have Sylvester and Porky together, which would be fitting because Sylvester has been Porky's pet on occasion. But other than that, that's pretty much it for level 3. Really not a whole lot going on. Level 4, on the other hand, is a whole different story. So, the abandoned mines. Thanks to CMS Global 1, sometimes the opening is sunset, and sometimes it's a rainy night. Meanwhile, if you go back to sunset and get CMS Global 2 involved, we wind up with a rainy sunset. And then, if you transition to night, it's a stormy night. As a reminder, the beta version added some stormy sound effects here, regardless of whether the weather was rainy or not. It would have definitely been appropriate whenever it was stormy like this. As for inside the mines, there's just a lot of scenery to list. We've got dynamite, we've got chains, we've got lanterns, we've got light bulbs, we've got ropes, we've got ladders, we've got pickaxes, we've got flowers, we've got bones. Am I missing anything? Oh yeah, the plungers. How could I forget? Emperor Seth was wondering why the plungers didn't do anything. Well, that's because they're one of the randomized bits of scenery. All of these changes from CMS Global 4 through 8. Meanwhile, on occasion, you'll also find a pile of rocks, sometimes with a board on top, and sometimes without. You can thank CMS Global 6 for that, which also happens to be why there's sometimes flowers. And of course, I mentioned that sometimes the signs can change. That is thanks to CMS Global 3. The sign can be an exclamation mark. It can say, "Look out!" Or it could say, "Keep out." Alright, I know when I'm not wanted. Let's move on to level 5, where up in the Alps, there is a 50-50 chance that it'll be snowing, thanks to CMS Global 8. And CMS Global 7 will also make it foggy in the lower sections of the Alps. Meanwhile, if it is snowing, there is a 1 in 4 chance that when you enter Wacky Land, it'll be raining cats and dogs. Literally. This only happens if CMS Global 8 and CMS Global 1 happen to align. Otherwise, what'll more likely happen is it'll be raining fish bones. Between this and the raining animals, I'm not sure which would be worse. I mean, yeah, the cats and dogs will most likely give you a concussion, but the fish bones probably stink up a storm. And by the way, us pigs have pretty strong noses. So you know what? Let's just play it safe. We'll get rid of the weather entirely. Besides, I need to be able to show off all the scenery clearly. For example, those teeth and eyeball in the background. Or should I say, that rib cage and eyeballs in the background. A word of advice, don't leave your egg hanging on the clothesline for too long. It'll shrivel up into grapes. How ironic. Watermelon and lemons would be a weird combination. But apples, bananas, and eyeballs would be quite the exotic combination. Whichever you prefer, pack up your lunch, because we are heading to the final level. Here at the castle grounds, it could be rainy or foggy, but I wanted a clean look at the scenery again. Now, I said it was appropriate that Daffy Duck would have decapitated topiary of Bugs Bunny. However, thanks to CMS Global 2, Daffy could wind up going with more narcissistic scenery. Or alternatively, he could go with his suffering succotashing counterpart, Sylvester. Also, were you wondering about the identity of the cloaked figure haunting the castle courtyard? Well, with the help of CMS Global 3, we can finally disrobe this figure. And I do mean disrobe. It took a 1 in 4 chance to see those boxers. Next, into the castle we go. And gotta say, that red wallpaper and green flooring is kinda colorful considering this is supposed to be a haunted old castle. But with CMS Global 1, we can fix that. Wind up with a more faded look. Or, if you actually do like the saturation of the first look, we could also swap the green with the red. As for the decor, the Daffy statues are surprisingly optional. Various CMS flags can change the statues, as well as the doors and mirrors. Also, I can't remember what was on the walls during my playthrough. It was either axes or maces. Either option is available. And with the sword and shields, the shield can be either a traditional shape or a round shape. The mace and shields are determined by CMS Global 3. And finally, we arrive in the pole area, where the decor on the wall can be recolored with CMS Global 1. And the flaming pipe is also affected. By the way, I don't know about you, but I don't like the feeling of walking around with wet fur. I mean, I'm not necessarily fluffy, but I'm not hairless either. So how about we go ahead and replace some of these life preservers with some towels. And likewise, the color of the towels can be changed along with everything else. By the way, while the towels are nice, anybody who isn't a duck needs to have at least a little bit of safety ensured, so some of the life preservers are going to be unaffected by these changes. And that's basically it. I have shown just about every change of scenery in the game. I'm sure there's a few that I missed. If you're wondering why it took me 2 weeks to get this bonus episode out, One of the reasons is that searching for all of these changes has been a difficult game of spot the difference. But I think I did a pretty good job of showing just how varied the scenery can be in this game. It certainly helps make replaying the game kind of interesting, especially if you're one of the more observant folk out there. At the least, certainly presents a Mandela effect. It's like, wait, I don't remember there being towels here. Now, before we end this here today, I want to show off a piece of scenery that I had missed while exploring the Haunted Woods. There is this tombstone here featuring Daffy Duck with devil horns. It's worth pointing out that this tombstone is the only such tombstone in the entire game, which to me implies it has significance. Like, it might be implying that Daffy is dead? Maybe he's haunting Porky. Daffy is the main antagonist in this game after all, even if he only makes a couple of appearances. I don't know, maybe I'm looking too deep into it, but it was definitely important to show this off before we end things. And on that note, this is the end of the playthrough. Or at least I think it is. I don't know, there might be some other big discoveries to be made, and if that winds up being the case, I'll do another bonus episode, and retitle this one as Bonus 1. Otherwise, that's pretty much that. For now, I hope you've enjoyed this playthrough. It took me a lot of work figuring out where all the secrets were and planning my routes, not to mention putting this episode together. But like I said, this game may have its flaws, but I do like this game, and I really wanted to show it off to the best of my ability. With that said, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.